right? There could be, there could be, just megabytes of data, whatever. But I'm communicating back to this backend the whole time. And the way that these like interactive demos work is that they're all in a Docker container that's sandboxed and a app armor on top of it. And it just sends back a result that can be interpreted in the front end across languages. And that's it. That was my overview, made up in a few seconds. Yeah. Any questions?
That's very cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, you're welcome.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. My name's Ian Smith. I work at USAA. I bang on the keyboard and they pay me money, and so that's how that works. Today I'm going to go over a project and time management tool that I built for my team. This is hand-rolled from scratch, and the stack is MySQL, Classic ASP, JSON, and Angular. The reason it's Classic ASP just has to do with the fact that that's what a server was available at work, and in order to get something different, it was going to take a lot of meetings and configuration and stuff like that. I didn't really feel like fighting with it, and it was a server that was available, so that's what I went with. I hate it when people jump into like abstractions or code and stuff without showing whatever something is. So I figured I'd go ahead and show you the tool and how it works. One of the biggest things that the tool does is that it shows resources and the assignments that they have. So this is a lot for management to be able to get an insight into what people are doing. You can see all resources. You can get into a specific person. So if I want to get into what my time is currently doing, if I want, I can edit the hours for what I'm doing. So say next week, I'm going to be working on something, so I can enter my hours and save, and it updates on the timeline. I can view any of the assignments that are assigned to me and view the history of it, get into it if I want to, update it. Within these, I can go to different teams. I can also go to different statuses, so the projects that I've completed, stuff that's on hold, new projects. So anyway, you can see that it's got a lot of stuff on here. So this is stuff that I've done in the past, and this is stuff that's coming up that I haven't started yet. So that's the timeline view. There's a little bit of reporting aspects to it, but didn't get too far into that so far. These are projects that are for our groups. This is kind of an inbox for new projects, but you can see projects with any other kind of statusing related to them. So you can filter, like for instance, these are complete or these are in progress. You can add new projects, so we can go ahead and add one right here. So this is test project. So save. And then from there, that project is saved, and then we can add different people to this project. So I'll go ahead and add myself. This actually does add it, so I always add myself in demos because it sends an email that you got an assignment, and if I add other people, they get really annoyed. So here, I'd add, and I can see myself right there, and you'll notice that a lot of this stuff is going really, really fast, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's a client-based application. You can add comments here, and then immediately it shows up. So, and if I want to go in and edit any of this stuff, I can just change values, and it's good to go. So more or less, it's about time management, people being able to edit their hours, their projects, management gets an insight into what they're doing, add projects, add assignments, so that's it. Whenever my management came to me, originally I was like, oh yeah, let's do it all client side, it's going to be really fast and it'll be great, and I built it and it totally sucked, and it was really slow. And so I'll go over with you guys some stuff that I did to make it better and faster. You'll notice that inside of the application I was using a lot of modals and popovers and stuff like that. So just as a quick aside, I wrote a framework outside of work that's open source called Modality. If you want to check it out, it is. You can find it on GitHub. My name is Ian Richard on GitHub, and then you'll see the Modality project. But it's a really easy way of loading modals and popovers, and you can basically define whatever it is that you want to load, and then say whether or not you want it to be a popover modal. The selector can be either something that's like in the DOM by using a selector, so it could be either an ID or like a CSS, any other valid CSS selector. And it's really, really, really highly configurable. So, and there's a lot of documentation on it, so if you're interested in using it, go for it. If there are any bugs or anything like that, let me know, and I'll go ahead and fix it. So, that is a quick aside. Alright. I'm not going to go too far into this, but basically this is the database structure of the application. So even though it looks really simple, there's a lot going on under the hood. They really like it. But anyway, I'm not going to go too far into that. Just kind of looking at the weight of the application, of how it's distributed. About 2,200 lines of ASP, about 26 something like that of JavaScript, and 15 of HTML, and about 1,100 of CSS. This does not include third-party libraries. It's just what's hand-rolled. So just to kind of show the distribution. For those who are new to Angular or just want a way of looking at it, like when I try and explain Angular, for those who are like super pros at it, they may think that this is like a horrible diagram and it's not accurate, but I tried to visualize like how things are working. This may not really be the order in which things actually load or run, but it's kind of something that I wanted to show to explain what was going on. So the way that I wrote it, there are services, n number of services on the server, and for every service that's on the server, there's a corresponding service on the client. So it's this one-to-one relationship for services. But controllers can load any number of services. And so, they can load one service, 3 services, n number of services, it doesn't matter. But then on the views, they have a corresponding one-to-one for the view to the controller. After that, once the views have rendered their filters, and I'll go into those a little bit, but basically Filters are ways of filters are ways of taking raw data and changing it into something that's more useful, which then has the rendered DOM. I kind of bolted on for the timeline. You'll notice that there are bars and some other stuff. Some of that can't really be done using Angular by itself. It needs to have some kind of placement determination. So there are DOM utilities that I strapped on top of that after all the filters are run, and then CSS styles on top of that. So as I've never really seen a diagram on like how Angular is stacked or anything like that, so I attempted to make a way of viewing that. This is just a quick look into the file structure that I had, but basically in the JavaScript there are directives, libraries, utilities, I have my filters, router. One thing that I'll get into in just a little bit is the difference between modules and pages. So pages are kind of main views, and modules are sections within those pages that are kind of compartmentalized and plug and play into other areas. And then services, and then the actual application itself, and the main app JS that runs that application. For third-party libraries, I use jQuery. I ended up using it for Ajax because of the way that Angular wanted to do their network requests out of the box was a little bit different than what the server was handling, and so I just used jQuery for the Ajax. And then DOM utilities that are after Angular renders its stuff. And then modality, that framework that I made that I just showed you guys, that's open source, that runs on top of it, and it plays really nicely with Angular. One thing that I like to do in applications is create config objects in the HTML. And so one of them is for service URLs, and so basically all this stuff is RESTful, and I forgot to show you the services. So this is kind of a look into some of the different services that run the application. So these are the efforts that are loaded. These are the assignments that get loaded, and this is some of the data that runs the timeline. And there are even more services than that. So you can see this is the full list of services that run the application, and so there's basically a way of kind of aliasing where the services are loaded inside the application instead of hard coding them in the JavaScript. This is my super gangster string concatenation for my service in ASP. I could have probably written an object to JSON string utility or something like that, but I really didn't feel like spending a lot of time on it or trying to get an open source library in the building, because some of that stuff's a little bit pain in the butt in a large organization. So this is just a way of seeing like how this turns into the JSON that you just saw that's in the browser. And so that, yeah, this is another example of what we were just looking at. These are for efforts, so you can see that basically it's got an ID, who submitted it, and in the filters we'll look at, you can see like the submitter who actually submitted it, that's their employee ID, but it gets mapped to their name, and I'll show how we do that in a second. And then some of the other data related to it. And you can see that some of this, it's not necessarily a fully flat structure, it's got some nested arrays or data inside of it. So for instance, an effort can have notes in it, which is like an array of different notes, or comments, that's what it really is. And then some of them get a little bit more complex and structured with nested arrays and components and stuff like that. What we were just looking at in the browser here, there's a plugin for Chrome that I really like. It's called JSON View. So if you don't have it, what I had rendered from the server is just this like gigantor minified string of JSON. But if you install this plugin, it'll look like what I just pulled up in the browser. So it's kind of a nifty deal, and After you install it, you don't have to worry about it. So any JSON request that you have, it'll load in the browser and it'll look all prettified like that. So pretty cool. Check it out if you end up using JSON like that and want to see it more clearly. So as far as the services are concerned, it's kind of the things that I wanted to balance. Basically, we're looking at can this data be used in other views, and then will the client have to do a lot of work to use the data? So it's kind of balancing out those considerations when making the service. So basically, do you really tightly couple your services to your UI implementation, or do you abstract them to make them kind of more generic? But if they're, so if they're too generic though, then they might not be as useful. You might have to do a lot of work. So one example, sometimes like, you saw the data structures that were coming back from the service, from the server, but sometimes you may want to do more complex determination. I'm not that great. I'm kind of a hack in classic ASP, and I really didn't care to learn it. So for some things, I did a little bit more advanced determination and injection of data on the client. So sometimes when I get it back, this is an example of I want to know what, say for instance, whether or not a project is running hot. So that way I can turn the bar red when I'm like, hey, there are too many hours have been gone on this one. So I'll do some nested looping and do this determination and inject that data on the client. Not in an ideal world, you probably would have to do this and you would do all this determination on the server, but sometimes just kind of balancing that out depending on whether or not you really want to get that much logic on the server. But ideally, I'd probably do it all on the server. There are services, and later on in the performance section, I'm going to get into how to do better services than this, but basically, services are for basically your CRUD operations. So, your create, read, update, deletes. So there's getting data, saving, deleting. So we'll get into that in a little bit on how to do that better. By the way, if you guys want me to stop or have any questions like that, or want me to go into the real code, some of this code is kind of abstraction of what's really in there, and I cut out stuff. So, but it's just for simplification of being able to get through concepts. This is basically a service, kind of the front end of a service, being able to determine what to do with the request. So, for instance, the design server that I had availability to wouldn't allow the delete, so I used a get to do the delete. But anyway, and same with a put. For some reason, it wouldn't allow a put request, so I did a post. But it did a determination within there whether or not to do a post or a put inside of there. And then on the one thing I did from a performance perspective on the post and the put, instead of doing a subsequent get after doing a post or a put, immediately send back what was like updated from that, and that way you don't have to say, hey, post this, okay, I got it, okay, let me go get something else. It just comes back as part of the post or put request. All right. Controllers. So looking at the application controller structure, this is kind of how it's broken down. Like I mentioned before, there are modules and pages, and I'll show how that's broken down visually in just a second. But basically, there's global nav module, pages, and then modules inside of those pages. I'm not going to read all these out. So here's an example of a project. On the left side is the global nav module, so in that red. In the green border is showing the page where my ugly mug is, and that plus sign, those are people who are assigned to the project. That's a module because it can in theory be used in other places, and it's self-contained. Same with comments. Comments are related to the project, but that comments module could be put somewhere else, and then same with the data related to the project. And I don't know if you remember or not, but back in the timeline view, you can load the details of the project right there in line on the timeline inside of the modal. So in certain circumstances, I was able to 100% reuse the same code in different contexts. So this kind of breakdown really allowed great reuse. So pages versus modules. Basically, can it be used in other views? If yes, then it makes sense. Like, hey, there's this, and this is probably just coding in general. But and can its code be self-contained? Is it really dependent upon other stuff? But one thing that I see at work a lot, in general, or just a thing that people can run into, don't over-modularize things to where, in order to get to any file, you have to go into like all this crazy nested structure just to get to something. So don't hyper-modularize it, but it's kind of a balancing act. This is an example of a router. It's kind of creepy sounding.
It's either a parking or something.
Oh, is that like a truck?
Probably.
Okay. One of the biggest things inside of Angular, besides the the controllers that we're looking at, is the router. This is a minified version of what the application router is. So I'll go over a few things that I had in there. So the when is basically saying when that URL exists, then do this certain thing. One thing to note, so like on efforts, in my application, I want to make sure that we have a public-facing view of it. So if you're not inside of our group that's managed by permission roles in our database, then you get routed to a front door request to where you can request something from our group to do work for you. So for instance, on the guest check right there inside of the resolve on the first thing, it'll say, hey, if they're a guest, then send them to a new effort form. Inside the resolve, that's actually, I believe you can pass in n number of callbacks, so the guest check is just arbitrary. I think you can pass in a whole collection of those things and it'll run all of those callbacks. And then another thing, on the next one, on the effort / with the colon ID, or colon effort ID, that's something that can be picked up by the page and passed in as page parameters, which is kind of nice. Anyway, okay. And then basically you're mapping the route to the controller that you want. And then there's this otherwise, which is kind of nice. So basically, if someone's messing around on your page and they start, entering invalid URLs or something, it'll catch them and route them to whatever you want them to be routed to. Filters are one of my favorite things about Angular. And in this example, and you can chain them too. But in this example, on the timeline view, there's a line that shows the day, and then on the end there's a number, and then it's got the first, like it'll be ST, second ND, third RD, fourth TH. So it's a little detail, but at the same time, it's something extra to code. And so how do you deal with that? And so basically, on this filter, you pass in a number, and then from the number, you can get to whatever that should actually be. So this is an actual example of chaining filters. So current day is the day, which is an actual date in the database format. So it's 2015-602. Date is actually an Angular filter. So Angular has filters out of the box. A lot of them are pretty nice. They've got number formatting, date formatting, some string formatting, stuff like that. So in this example, it took the day, which is a date, and then it converted it to the date as a day. That's what that D parameter is. And Angular did that. That's its own filter. And then I made my own filter called day suffix. And day suffix basically takes that filter or it picks up where the Angular filter left off. And then it runs through this logic on the left and basically says whether or not to add the ST, ND, or RD. Does that make sense? One thing that I use a lot is this ID to label method, or filter rather. And basically you pass in an ID, you pass in whatever collection you want to get stuff from, and then you pass in the attribute that you want to get from it. And so I use it all over the place, and it's really powerful because what I did is whenever I sent JSON from the server, instead of everything being the actual value of what it is, so instead of saying that this effort is redesignUSA.com, I could just pass in the effort ID, and then I have a static data object that I do mapping and say, okay, here are the efforts, here are like static effort data, and then map it so I can pass in an ID, and then out of that I get redesignUSA.com.
Did you do the same thing for like the user IDs?
Yeah. So that's really powerful because because like people are assigned to efforts and stuff and assignments like all over the place, and I could have repeated people's names over and over and over and over, but instead I just pass in their employee ID, and then from there I use a filter to map their employee ID to their actual name, and then from their name you can do even more filtering, like their last name first or just their first name. So like in a certain view when you're doing sorting, you want their last name, then comma, their first name. But in another view, like when you're actually looking at their picture and you want to just see their first name because you know who they are.
So when the app boots up, you obtain that static data set, like all the resources that are available.
Yeah, so I made a service just for static data.
Cool.
So it's a way to do it. I mean, it's not necessarily like the best way or the only way. It's just something that I made up and thought it was an interesting way of managing it. So this is another example. And one of the biggest reasons I did that too is it's for saving data. So I've got all these forms all over the page for adding an effort or updating effort or comments and stuff like that. And what I can do is whenever I pass the data in, or whenever I use services to pass the data in kind of a more raw format, I can ship it back exactly the same way. And so that way I don't really have to have this translation layer on the back end. It's basically just sending it exactly what its ID is on the database. So for instance, on the left right here is kind of that static data like I was talking about. So I've got these IDs and then what those actually map to. So on the right is what comes back from the server. And so like that status right there, I look at 2 and then 2 is in progress. So all of there, and there are hundreds of efforts that are coming back from the database. So instead of saying in progress, in progress, in progress, I'm just saying, effort status 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a way of managing it. And then down there in the bottom, you can see basically how that filter is being run. So basically getting the status ID, and then my filter is called ID to label, or sorry, my filter is called ID to label, and then I'm passing in static data.efforts, effort status, and then I want the return value of status name. Directives are basically ways of you accessing DOM elements without making Angular blow up. And so at the very bottom here, you can see input type equals text and ng enter equals submit comment. So in that comments form, all you have to do is type it in and hit enter. And from there, you can tell Angular what you want it to do. And so this is just a simple example of how to do that. So some utilities that I made, an ASP, and this is probably common what you would do like in any language, but basically data sanitization. So when you ship stuff over the server, with like invalid characters and stuff like that before you store it in the database, JSON encoding, date formatting, managing database connections, and authentication. I think it's important in any language, whether or not it's Java or JavaScript or ASP or whatever, that whenever you're using a particular framework, to pull as much as you can outside of that framework, so you're not too tightly coupled to it. So I wrote some array utilities, collection utilities, date utilities, So for some of the controllers, I needed more advanced data, and so like that injection stuff that I was talking about earlier, that maybe I should have or could have done on the server, but wanted more flexibility of knowing JavaScript. So that type of stuff didn't really need to be coupled to Angular, and then post Angular rendered DOM manipulation, same type of stuff. That doesn't really need to have to do anything with Angular. What's so funny?
I was just thinking, why don't you use Lodash for this? And then I thought, oh yeah, it's open source, and you have to read through the whole.
Exactly.
And the same thing with dates and Moment.js.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're cool.
And I'm a masochist, and I like to write my own stuff. Okay, so there's some performance considerations. When I wrote this thing, and I talked so much big game to my management, I was like, this thing's gonna be awesome, and it's gonna be really fast, and it was super slow. It was horrible. So I did some stuff to speed it up. Once again, like internally, some things are kind of hard. So normally you'd probably use build tools to help minify and concatenate and stuff like that. I wrote this aggregator on the server that basically you pass in a list of what you want, and it'll aggregate it and minify it and all that stuff for you. So basically on the URLs, I made the standard of like aggregate.css config, aggregate.js config, and you just put a list of stuff and it'll take care of it for you. For processing, I wrote rules. Basically, you want to make sure that when your page is loading, you have some type of feedback to the user that stuff is processing. So I wrote a method in each controller called page is ready or module is ready or whatever. And the top part is HTML and the bottom part is the controller. And basically it has a method that says, hey, page is ready, and then it's looking what is all the dependent data that you need, and then once all that stuff's ready, you say, yeah, the page is ready, or no, it's not ready yet. And then this is like Lucy.
Is it just Angular dependent data, or overall? Like,
is it? Say it again.
Just Angular dependent data, or is it
Yeah.
overall? Okay.
Yeah, just whatever is needed for that controller.
Okay.
So you could have a spinner, like for instance, sometimes when I had pages that are broken into different modules, they each had their own spinner. So for instance, the comments could be ready, but not the assignments or not the effort, so they would kind of come in on their own. All right, so this is really what like screwed up my app and why it was slow. I saw some examples in Angular and some other places on how to write services, but when I tried to do them, they weren't working properly. So I kind of went rogue and like made my own stuff, and it was really a horrible idea. And anyway, so this is service prior to refactoring, and basically on the left in the service, this is an example of getting data. So and it basically returns a promise, and in my controller on the right, I'm saying, hey, get data, and then my efforts are mapped to that data. But the problem is, first of all, whenever you do that, that's a one-time association of that data. And you have to explicitly, and then I called, hey, get efforts data for the first load, and you can call that subsequently whenever you need it. So anyway, part of the problem with this, let me see real quick, is regardless of whether or not the data has already been loaded, it'll load it again and again and again because I didn't write any checks within it. So I refactored a bit, and then what I did was make it more service-based, and then make it event-based, and then in the event pass back the data as part of it. And it actually worked out pretty well, but when I presented it in the forum at work, they were like, you're a freaking moron for doing this. So I felt kind of bad. But anyway, it's one way of doing it, and it worked, and it adds some stuff like a check to see if the efforts or the data already exists, and another check to make sure that one problem that I had, if there were multiple controllers that were looking for data and they were both on the page, they would both request the data at once. And then in here, like on the previous one, the efforts, like for instance, I'm doing if efforts. So basically, if the data exists, then resolve it. Otherwise, go get it. But if two controllers load it at exactly the same time, the efforts aren't going to exist. So it's going to go load it, and then they're still not going to exist because the AJAX request hasn't come back yet. So I had instances where there were like 3 controllers that were looking for the same data, and then 3 AJAX requests were firing at the same time. And then when I'm doing this for 3 or 4 different services, and all of a sudden I've got like 12 AJAX requests going at once. So it was like a really horrible way of doing stuff. So this one's a little bit smarter because it basically checks to see if it's being retrieved. And so that's just a flag to make sure that you don't do multiple requests at once. And then it broadcasts an event and passes back the efforts. And then inside the controllers, they latch onto these events and then they assign their data whenever stuff happens. So for instance, in this example, when the efforts are available, that's broadcast from the service, and then you just assign the data to that. And this actually worked pretty well, and it fixed the performance issues of the application. But anyway, that's not really, I don't think, how Angular was meant to be used. I think I just went over this. Yeah. So this is a much more simple way of doing things, to where basically the right way to use Angular, and Kevin can chime in if I'm not right here, but a better way to do it is, in services you should have a live reference to the data from your controller into the service. So whenever any data updates in the service, your controller automatically updates as well. And so in this example on the left, you can create 2 objects inside of your service. One is the service itself, or methods for saving, deleting, whatever you need to do. In this one, this is a way to do it, but basically in your service you immediately, the service will load once and you immediately go get the data, and then you save that to the data that you want inside of your service. And then any subsequent stuff, your service has exposed methods to save or delete or whatever. But once you do that in your controller, all of it automatically updates. So you can have multiple controllers refer to that service, and because there's that live connection, they'll automatically update. So it's kind of nice. So basically, before and after updates of the previous one to this one, you get data once when you're loading the service. Now there's a live reference. Whenever you update stuff in the service, it's automatically reflected to controllers. But the one gotcha, and the reason I guess I couldn't get it to work in the first place, was that you have to have an object in the service and the controller for that to work. For some reason, like, they both have to be objects and they'll be happy together. So I made a, let's see if this will work. So I made a demo page if you're interested. Actually, that's kind of outside, like more abstracted outside. So looking at the service right here, I did a timeout just to simulate an AJAX request, but basically it's the same thing. So by default, the data is set to the name of Hill Country JavaScript, and then I did a timeout of 3 seconds just to say, hey, this is set to Ian, and then created some methods for changing the name or.
Can you make the text bigger?
No. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically in this service, I've got the service and the data. Those are the 2 key parts of the service. And so by default, setting it to Hill Country JS, and then this is just a simulated network request, changing it to something else, and then having a method in the service to be able to change the name. And then in the app, I made 2 controllers that basically do the exact same thing, and they're mapped to the data. and they have the ability to change the name to something else. And so let me run this real quick. So you can see right here it says hello, hello country JavaScript, and after a couple seconds it changed to Ian. And then now in here, they're both mapped to the exact same service, and it's not a copy of the data or anything like that, it's actually a live reference to it. So if I hit change name, it'll say hey Chris, you'll notice that both of the controllers updated, and if I hit it again, it'll say hey Kevin. It's a little shout out. But anyway, that's a much better way, I think, of doing services in general, of having that live data reference. I think that's how you're supposed to do it. Kevin, is that how you're supposed to do it?
Yeah, services are great for sharing data across controllers.
Yeah. But with the live data references like that, correct? Oh. Anyway, all right. I've just got a few random like tangents now at the end. So one thing that is absolutely, if you guys have never gotten into it before, I think is absolutely crucial is local workspaces. Do any of you guys have Chrome local workspaces set up? One. Bateman, you don't have Chrome local workspace set up? Dude. All right. If nothing you get out of this, all I care about is if you want to check out modality, that's fine. If you want to look at the that plunker deal I made on how to do a service more properly, that's fine. And then Chrome local workspace, you got to do it. But basically, it's awesome. You can modify CSS and JavaScript on the fly, and because you've mapped it to file system resources, you can poke at it and it saves it. And so basically, the way that I do my workflow at work or outside of work is I'll stub out all of my HTML and put classes in there, and I'll put stubs of all the classes in a CSS file, and I literally just poke through the whole page in the inspector, and it saves it all to disk, and then you're done. Like, that's it. You never have to use a text editor or anything like that. So it's really, really, really powerful. I could not recommend it. I mean, it literally has made me like 4 or 5 times faster at development. So I highly, highly recommend it. One other thing, I use SVG for the assets, and I highly recommend SVG as well. But one thing that people tend to not get right, especially when they bring stuff over from Photoshop or something like that, is, I don't know if you guys see this, but on the left logo, it's kind of blurry, like the anti-aliasing between the top of the XD and the blue background. So one thing that you can do in Illustrator is you go to a pixel preview mode, and then in there you can start adjusting the assets to snap to the pixel grid. And once you do that, it'll look really sharp on the screen. So that's just some random tangent, because I'm a designer. That's like technically my job. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that. So that's the end of my rambling. So if you guys have any questions, comments, want to look at stuff again, let me know.
How long did it take you
Uh,
for like editing the whole thing?
It probably took about 3 months of dedicated work. So it was a pain. They still have me do updates here and there, and sometimes it breaks and I have to fix it. But yeah, it's kind of weird owning an application like that, like doing it end to end, and then you're like the owner of this baby, and you're kind of like, I don't know if I really want this thing, but.
So we don't know the better.
Yeah.
How many teams use it?
It's my team and the macro team, so it's three teams. But yeah, they're talking about opening up. I don't know if they actually will or not, but
You didn't want to just use info forms?
no. No, it was funny. Like a while back, my management, they had me do an evaluation of Salesforce, RTC, Basecamp and some other tools and stuff like that, and none of them really fit what they were looking to do. I was just like, yeah, I'll build it real quick, and then like 3 months into it, I'm like, oh my god, I hate my life. So, but it was a good learning experience, and you know, it's one of those things that after doing it, you know, especially with me screwing up how I did services and redoing them properly, and you know, and there are certain other things that to consider too, like whenever you know, write your filters, making sure that they're performant, because and like it's interesting every once in a while I put console logs and certain things like filters and whatnot to see how often they're getting called, because a lot of Angular stuff gets called really repetitively, and just make sure that you don't have expensive stuff flying all over the place. So.
Did modality come out of this work, or was it there before? Did you create it before?
No, I created it before.
But I bet you fine-tuned it with this.
I did. Yeah, every time I use it, I fine-tune it. But one thing that kind of sucks is like, so Chris and I, but mostly Chris and like some of his team, like I've done component research at work on like how to best approach components, and the way that I wrote modality is like a complete bastardization way to not write components. So, I mean, it's good in the sense that it's abstract, but one kind of cool conclusion that they came out of their research is to have components kind of manage themselves and like have methods accessible to the DOM elements themselves. And I wrote things from more of like a manager delegate perspective, and so it's just a different approach of doing things. But and it's not bad, it's just different. I really like the approach that they came out of that research, so I haven't really migrated it yet. And then at some point I would like to move away from jQuery from it, but I just haven't had the time to do that.
What's the alternative?
I was gonna bare bones it. So, and that kind of goes back to browser support too. So, might wait a couple of years to where, you know, it's not a big deal to support not that much. So.
You're really big on rolling your own, huh?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, so the main reason. Let me show you something. The main reason that I wrote modality is. I'm a designer, and you know, some of my best friends are designers, and a lot of times, like, people they don't get details right. So, as an example, like, you know, a lot of times when you load a popover or modal and you resize it, you know, it loads off the screen or whatever, and so like this thing goes like fully responsive all the way down to the freaking size of a watch, and so like I've almost never seen anything that does that. And so with like popover, it does the same thing, and it's constant. Oops, just moved the whole browser. It's constantly looking at where the most screen real estate is, and even like see how the caret stays in like this, you know, or it moves to stay centered inside of the invoking element. I've never found anywhere on the internet that takes something to that level of detail, that's constantly looking to where the most amount of available space is and having that level of detail on that. So that's kind of, you know, being a designer, that's kind of why I like to write my own stuff, is just because, you know, love having that level of detail and performance in it.
You didn't cover directives much, did you? Just not use a lot of directives?
I didn't use a lot of directives because, I mean, there were a couple. I used it for like the comments on ng enter. I think I used a couple more, but it's because I use that kind of bolt-on post-render DOM utility stuff. I probably could have used directives for that, and I just didn't. It was a way of decoupling from Angular a bit. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but that's just what I did.
For the timeline, I mean, you just did that all custom, right?
Yeah.
Is it all just regular, like, I know like at the top you got like notches for the weeks and stuff.
Oh my God, that was.
Are those all just like divs with borders on them, or what did you build that with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take a look. Yeah, it's a bunch of like spans. Doing the measurement and alignment for all this stuff. A lot of this is very difficult because there are so many details in this that you don't even think about. For instance, David did the design for this, and one thing that he wanted was only Monday through Friday. So he didn't want Saturday or Sunday. So creating these things to where they repeat, they show weeks. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a dark line right here for the beginning of the month. So how do you put the beginning of the month relative to the week that it's related to? Keeping the background of the rest of these, of all of these guys in sync with the top of these timelines. Yeah, it was a lot of work. I mean, so much detail. I could talk to you for hours about how much went into making those. Because even things like the beginning of the weeks having larger notches than the rest of them, and yeah. And then one thing that was interesting too is being able to scroll horizontally and vertically and keep the positioning of top bar. Because normally you could just use fixed positioning for the top of this, but you can't do that because of being able to scroll horizontally. So that's one thing, and part of the DOM util is that it grabs it, and as you scroll, it basically keeps pushing it back up to where it, or if it's horizontal, it'll move it according to like where the scroll position is. And when you're scrolling vertically, it continually sets it to the top of the that area position.
If our method of timekeeping wasn't so screwed up, it probably be quite so hard.
Yeah. All right, anything else?
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if you haven't already, please sign in. I know some people haven't signed in yet, so who's this? Sorry. It's just so that Ethan can help. Sorry, let's go this way. Ethan can kind of keep track and see how bad we might be at this point. So they can make fun of me. They send me really bad harassing emails, just like Kevin, you're horrible. Please just failing so poorly.
Are you guys Geekdom members?
No, but they do heavily support Geekdom. Geekdom sponsors the Meetup by they provide the pizza. I'm also going to get them to reimburse the beer if I can send them a receipt if I remember. And they also provide this space. If you're not a member of Geekdom and you don't know what it is, it's a co-working space that's upstairs. Pretty cool. They've got a lot of stuff outside of just going in and working there. They've got a lot of events. I think they have a homebrew night where people bring in their beers that they've brewed and they try them out, and they've got like a cooking night where people cook stuff. So it's more of a community than just a place to work if you want to do co-working in town. So if you are interested, that's the spiel on that. So next month we do have a speaker lined up. I forget her name and what she's going to be talking about, but it is lined up. I just need to confirm and make sure it's still lined up. So I talked with her in May and got that set up. So then the month after that we have another speaker who's going to be driving down from Oklahoma. Fun. And the month after that we have another speaker. So I've done my homework this time. I know. So hopefully it won't get canceled. Yeah. So things are going. Watch out for the invite page for upcoming meetups, and I don't know, maybe I'll set up a Facebook page.
off Meetup.com?
I think so. It's just kind of pricey, and I don't have a sponsor.
Okay, could we talk to you about
Sure.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also Taco Tuesday?
Yes.
That's last Tuesday of the month. We had set up over at Cello's Tacos last time. It
The
was
UTSA.
too far, yeah. It was
Little
too
spot.
far from downtown for everybody else. So we're thinking about setting something up near here. So we need some feedback on where you guys want it.
Yeah. So that's during lunch, last Tuesday of the month. Who is near the downtown? Like, they'll be there during the workdays. You'll be. Who else?
Well, it's easier to get to from where I am than
Yeah.
northwest.
Northwest. So, one thing that I thought about was, and I think we had kind of talked about this, was still doing on the last Tuesday of the month up at Cello's, because that had a good turnout. 6 or 7 people come out. Because I know some people up there can only make it because it's right next to their place. And then maybe the second Tuesday of the month or another Tuesday here and have somebody else run that one, so that you're not overloaded with stuff. Or if you wanna run,
Well,
yeah, that'd be great. So that way, like, not everybody has to attend every single one, but you just show up to the one that you can, and it's a bit more scattered throughout the city, but easier for everybody. So we can't do the second Tuesday of the month because it's already passed. But yeah, I guess we'll figure it out this month for that. What do you think?
well, do you want to, so you want to keep Cello's at the last Tuesday of the month?
At the very least, we could do that for next month and going forward,
Okay.
and try downtown this month.
Yeah, we do downtown this, okay.
Okay, let's do it.
I'll set that up.
Awesome. And does anybody have anything that they want to shout out, or project that they want to plug, or jobs that they want to mention, like people either looking or hiring?
We're hiring.
USA is hiring. They have great benefits.
Both are good, right?
You can work with Ian or you can work with Chris. I will withhold who I prefer to work with.
Oh, and then, I'm sorry, I forgot to say if we're gonna have it at Cello's, our company can we're gonna sponsor ice cream as a dessert. Homemade ice cream. Made by me. It has liquor. So,
That made it more interesting.
I'll put that on the webpage.
I'm gonna tell you, his ice cream, we had homemade ice cream before. This raises the bar.
Yeah.
It really does.
When you say webpage, do you mean the meetup?
The Meetup page.
Yeah. Awesome. That's fantastic. So yeah. Any other companies? Say I work for Envision. They're a remote company. We're also hiring front end design. I used to already work. Yeah, I did. They do design prototypes. They're a design prototyping tool, so they make it easier for designers like Ian to do his job, which is to put together a lot of different designs and piece them together as a prototype. So not the finished piece, but show, okay, when you click this, it does this thing. Anyway, we are hiring a lot of people.
Is it like was Marvel?
Was that?
Marvel is like where you can take the PSDs and show it's clickable and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a lot like that. I don't know about that specific product, but yeah, that's the basic idea. Clickable interactive workshops. So, Envision, check that out if you're interested. I think they're going to be sponsoring. I just need to fill out the details for that. So, anything else? What time is it? 8:25. I think. Feel free to stick around for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, get to know your friendly San Antonio developers and stuff. There's still pizza, I think, and there's plenty of beer. If y'all don't drink it, I'm gonna have to take it home, and I'm gonna try it. Chris?
Hey, how's it going? Are you guys wrapping up?
Yeah, do you want to say anything?
Oh man, I would love to talk to y'all.
Okay, this is Chris Turner, right?
Yes.
I remember his face.
Hi, how are y'all?
Pretty good.
So I was just demoing a product that I built out there. It's called Warp Speed, and it makes deploying your code to your server really easy. And if you all are interested, like I'm just kind of hanging out with the people that are left in there, showing some demos and things. And if you guys do JavaScript development and you maybe use Node to, how many of you guys use Node? Do you have some procedure for like deploying your code, I presume? Something that you use? What is it?
Jenkins.
There you go. So I would love to, yeah, and so I would love to tell you a little bit about what I've got going, hear about what you've got going, and then see, what you think. I deployed a Node project in like 27 seconds.
Live demo.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
all live. That's how I do it.
That's how we roll.
Right, guys? They saw it. How long did the Node deploy take? When I pushed it, it just took long enough to run the npm install and it was deployed.
Oh, lots of long apart.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, if any of y'all are interested, I would love to show you. Looking for some feedback and also some customers. So, yeah.
Awesome.
And I'll be right out there. So come hang out. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. I don't have anything else. Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you next month in August.
August already.
I know. Thank you for doing that. Let me know when it's uploaded. I guess you just upload the files yourself.
Should
right?
we streaming? Is there a way that we can have access
We'll see.
to the presentations or the recordings?
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be on our YouTube channel.
Oh,
If
cool.
he doesn't mess it up, which the likelihood of him messing it up versus me messing it up
Oh, yeah.
is much decreased because I'm